Hi everyone. Welcome, every one of you to another live stream with yours truly. This is Nigerian Perspective Live with your one and only Frank Steven. And this live stream is going to be interesting. Of course, you can already see that it is different. We are not coming at the usual time. We are coming a lot earlier, and it's because we have a very interesting guest, and we are going to be talking about something very, very interesting. Before I continue talking and rambling, you know how I ramble. I want you to destroy the like button, okay? Destroy that like button so more people can be aware of this. I know this is usually this is an unusual time, so many people who usually watch us will not know that we are live right now. So I want you to smash the like button so that everyone would know that we are live. And we'll have 150 people, even more than that. I believe we'll have more than that today. So I want to, of course, we are streaming on 2 platforms. So I want you, please hit the like button if you're on YouTube, especially if you're on YouTube. And hi to those who are watching us from Twitter. I hope you are hearing us loud and clear. And we'll have a very wonderful live stream. I have a very interesting guest. I have none other than let me read what what I saw, what I want to use to introduce him. Okay, this is a well-known Indian journalist with over 14 years work experience in critical breaking news situations and leadership role. He rose to limelight at the age of 16 for leading a very impactful first ever social media campaign in India. And he was announced among the top 25 youth icons of his country by India Today in 2007. And he was chosen as the top 25 capital change makers in New Delhi by Today the same year. Also in 2011, he was announced as a youth achiever by the Indian Today Corporation. And he's at present the executive editor of TV9 network, and earlier he worked as a group contributing editor to CNN News 18. So yes, we have somebody who has once worked at CNN. Yeah, I know I criticize them, but sometimes we bring them over. And he has worked at Network 18. He graduated political science from Ramjas College, Delhi University, before completing his master's in journalism from Xavier Institute of Communication, Mumbai. And he has done so many great things. There are so many things he has done. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Aditya Raj Kaul. How are you?
Hey, that was quite a bit, Frank, honestly. But so glad to be here with you. Amazing,
Yeah.
Chat that you run here on YouTube. And so glad, New Delhi connecting with Nigeria. And who
Yes.
knew that we'll be doing this conversation this afternoon?
Yeah, it's really I consider it very interesting that we have a Nigerian and an Indian talking about something very important. The greatness of social media and the need for us to connect with one another. And guys, I promise you this will be a very interesting show. It will be wonderful. We'll be talking about the topic we'll be discussing today is the plight of Hindu minorities in South Asia. We'll be trying to answer the question: are Hindus safe in South Asia? There are many news stories that have happened recently. There are many things that are going on that affect Hindu minorities and other minorities in South Asia, and we'll be talking about them today. And if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, I would like you to, if you want to type your question in the live chat, type a Q, then your question, and then I will highlight them so that later we can get to them maybe towards the end of the live stream or somewhere in the middle or at interval. However it works, we'll try and make it happen. Even if you're on Twitter, you can also, type send, I don't know how it works over there, a live chat with Q, and I will see it from my StreamYard from here. And please follow Aditya, follow him on Instagram, follow him on Twitter. You can see on the screen all the social media handles you should follow. Go and follow us, give us a follow, and let's get into it. Let's get into it, Raj. How are you? How is India today?
Well, India is good, hot and humid today. It's been raining sometimes. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's a holiday today in India because we are
Mm,
celebrating Janmashtami. That is the festival of Bhagwan Krishna. In fact,
mm,
Lord Krishna that we celebrate.
mm,
There's a Krishna Janmabhoomi very close to
mm,
Delhi, just a couple of hours away in Mathura and Vrindavan. So it's the day of Krishna, and
mm,
you might have heard of ISKCON. ISKCON is basically also people who worship Krishna. They say Hare
mm,
Rama, Hare Krishna. We all say it.
mm,
So yeah,
mm.
I'm home. Thankfully, you caught me at the right time because I had plenty of time. Otherwise, I would have been in office.
Oh, I'm happy that this was planned. You know, God, some divine forces made it possible, and we are here today. And I am really happy to have you. Tell us a little bit about you. I know my intro, we kind of covered some of the things about you, but tell us more. Tell us more about you. What should we know about you? What should my audience know about you?
Well, Frank, I'm from Jammu and Kashmir.
Mm-hmm.
I belong to a troubled state, unfortunately, a conflict area as well, where we've seen for the last more than 30 to 35 years Pakistan sponsored terrorism. We've seen Islamist terrorism
Mm,
in Jammu and Kashmir, particularly in Kashmir, where a lot of attacks have taken place. And in
mm,
particular, since 1990, there was selective targeting of Kashmiri Hindus because Hindus were in minority and
mm,
Hindus were always seen as representatives of India and Kashmir. They believed in the Indian constitution, they
mm,
believed in the Indian flag, they were completely non-violent and did not discriminate in
mm,
any ways. Most of the teachers in
mm,
Jammu and Kashmir were from the Hindu community as well. So they were not wealthy, upper
mm,
class people. They were, believed in equality, believed in teaching, education, etc. But since
mm,
1990, Hindus became a target in Kashmir, and as became my family as well. And I was just about nine
mm,
months old at that particular time when we had to move out because there were killings happening from mosques in the Kashmir Valley. There were slogans saying that Kashmiri Pandit should leave, Kashmiri men should
mm,
leave, and they should leave behind their women. That's the kind of slogan that was raised by the
mm,
Islamist radicals and terrorists in the Kashmir Valley. And within a span
mm,
of a few days, few weeks, and few months, there were
mm,
over 500,000 Hindus who were, persecuted and had to leave Kashmir Valley.
mm,
And my
mm,
family as well, we became refugees in our own country overnight. And I still have that bus ticket that we had, to leave, that ticket to exile. And then we
mm,
spent about a few weeks and months in a garage that was attached to a cow shed. And there were 12 to 15 members of our family living in that state in a garage, in a car garage.
mm,
And
mm,
then my parents thankfully decided to move to Delhi from Jammu for better opportunities. They had a
mm,
tough time in the first few years, very tough time.
mm, mm,
Both of them were academicians. They had done their PhDs in the Kashmir University, and
mm,
they had to struggle. In fact, we lost everything in Kashmir Valley. We lost our home. Our home was gutted by terrorists. Fire
mm,
brigade was not allowed to come there and douse the fire. And
mm.
it was like a 150-year-old house. And
Wow.
similarly, I mean, the Hindu history in Kashmir completely perished.
Mm,
And since the time I've gained, you know, knowledge and consciousness in the last specifically 20 to 25 years, 20 years,
mm, mm,
I have been trying to raise the voice of Hindus from Kashmir.
mm,
In the year 2006, when luck made me an accidental activist, I
mm,
formed a group called Roots in Kashmir of youth
mm,
from the Kashmir Hindu community from across the globe to raise awareness, to campaign for justice, to abrogate this section of Article 370 and 35A that was in Kashmir, and also campaign against terrorists and separatists. And that's why, for years together, I've received a lot of threats from Islamist
mm,
terror groups from Pakistan in particular. and I
mm,
have to roam around in Delhi now with security.
mm,
And it was in it was early in life that I decided that I had to become a journalist.
mm,
So, although I had nobody in the family in media, I had nobody in
mm,
the family in the government, or any wealthy person, so as to say. So it was a tough struggle for me.
mm,
So somewhere around 2008, I started writing and freelancing for the Times of India, which is one of
mm,
the oldest newspapers in Asia, one of
mm,
the biggest, in fact, in the world. And gradually, I shifted to television in 2013, and
mm,
since then, it's been more than a decade in television. I used to do breaking news. I've reported from more than 20 countries. I was
mm,
in Iraq at the peak of ISIS.
mm.
I went to South Korea, Australia, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, all the places, and
Yeah.
reported on a lot of multilateral visits also, from ASEAN to SAARC to UN to
Mm,
G20 to BRICS, and haven't looked back. But in the last 2.5 years, Frank, I've been making documentaries. So I've made more than
mm,
60 documentaries. Over seven of them have been awarded several times
mm,
in the last two
mm,
years. They're mostly focused on national security and foreign affairs. These are my
mm,
domains in particular. And I've done a
mm,
series on Balochistan. I've done
mm,
a series on Afghanistan. Both of them have been awarded. I've done one documentary, Airlift, which is on the Indians who were rescued from the Ukrainian territory when the war began. And
mm.
so, such is life. Now I'm a journalist for over 15 years now,
Mm,
and but yes, in the meanwhile, I also try to raise voice of Hindus in Kashmir, the persecuted minorities, not just in Kashmir,
mm,
but in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, and elsewhere.
mm, mm. That is quite the resume. That is quite the resume. I am odd. I am odd. The first question I want to ask with regards to the topic we are discussing is just to you made mention of the conflict in Kashmir, and so I think the first I have two questions. Maybe the second one will come later, but let me start with the first one. Is can you give us like a brief history, a timeline of how because I believe that from or from what I've seen or read, the conflict in Kashmir began like way into the creation of the state of India and the like independence of India, the creation of Pakistan. From that very region, that area has like been a war zone essentially. So can you tell us about the history of the conflict in Kashmir? Like right
You
from
know,
the top,
Frank,
the timeline
Frank,
quickly.
it's a very good question, because a lot of people do not dwell into the reality of what happened in Kashmir. And they don't
Mm,
even know that the Kashmiri Hindus were the aboriginal people of the
mm,
Kashmir Valley. Kashmir's name, in fact, has come from Kashab. And in fact, the oldest university, perhaps in the world, is
mm,
in Jammu and Kashmir. Unfortunately, now in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and it's called
mm,
Sharda. And the Kashmiri Pandit community has been striving to revive the Sharda University. That's where
mm,
one of our oldest philosophers and saints, Shankaracharya, went there, meditated. There were a lot of discourses and discussions that used to happen hundreds of years ago there, on Shastras,
mm.
on different Shastras of India. So if I go into the history, we'll have to sit for at least 4 to 5 hours to discuss what really happened in the Kashmir Valley. But I'll
Yeah.
briefly tell you the context, and then I'll switch to last 30 to 75 years. You
Mm,
know, ever since the Islamist invasion in Jammu and Kashmir and India, ever
mm,
since, Islamist conquerors from, different countries or from different areas of the world came
mm,
towards Jammu and Kashmir in their conquest, that's when
mm,
the persecution really began. And, you might have heard of the Mughal king Aurangzeb.
mm,
During his tenure as well, there was a lot of persecution that happened in the Kashmir Valley. In fact, a Sikh guru, or a Sikh saint, Guru
mm,
Tegh Bahadur, came to the rescue of the Kashmiri Hindus when Aurangzeb ordered that
mhm,
Hindus should be converted to Islam. And Guru Tegh Bahadur said that, you can kill me, but don't convert them. Such was the persecution of Hindus that were happening. Even today, a lot of Muslim community members in the Kashmir Valley have the Hindu surname, but they are
mm,
Muslims, you know. So
mm,
they were persecuted, they were tortured, and they had to keep that surname. It is only in the
mm,
last 300 to probably 400, 500 years that, this conversion has happened, and they don't have their history. If you ask them, they will say that their great grandfather or great great grandfather would be a Hindu. In fact, one of
mm,
the top politicians from Kashmir Valley, Frank, is Farooq
mm,
Abdullah, and he
mm,
himself says that my grandfather was a Hindu, and I am
mm,
a Muslim now, and such is the way, and that is how things will progress. But
mm,
coming to the partition, since the partition, uh, unfortunately, there was Pakistani intruders, Kabalis, who we call them, who entered
mm,
into Kashmir, tried to plunder from the north of Kashmir near Baramulla, and tried to
mm,
kill, rape women. But then the Maharaja of that time, Hari Singh, requested the Indian army to intervene, and
mhm,
these are documented facts. And then the Indian army came into the picture and fought against the Kabalis, and finally the
mhm,
Kabalis had to leave. But till the time that they were there, a few days, a lot of persecution had happened, a lot of killings
mm,
had happened, a lot of women were raped as well. And this
mm,
I'm talking about 1947.
mm,
Ever since that time, unfortunately, Pakistan took the issue to the UN, and then, of course, India also went to the UN. There were some political mistakes that India also made, and that are unfortunately discussed even today when there is a conflict internally between the ruling party and the opposition about the first Indian Prime Minister Nehru, and should he have done things different way and not approach
mm,
the UN because Jammu and Kashmir was an internal matter of India. But
mm,
then it went to the UN. There was a UN resolution as well. But as per the understanding, the first clause of the understanding was that Pakistan will have to vacate
mm,
from the occupied territory first for having any kind of a plebiscite or a referendum in Jammu and Kashmir.
mm,
That means that the Pakistan army or their any kind of terror groups, etc., will have to vacate areas of Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. That is Muzaffarabad, Kotli, Mirpur, all these areas. But Pakistan doesn't
mm,
agree to do the same because today Pakistan has completely occupied the territory that is under their control in Jammu and Kashmir, and the
mm.
Kashmiris or people from there in Jammu and Kashmir are treated as second class citizens.
Yes, it is.
Just like the Hindus or the Sikh or the Christians who are facing
Mm,
persecution in Pakistan, similarly, there are other ethnic minorities, etc. Look at what is
mm,
happening with the Baloch in Pakistan. Look at what is happening
mm,
with the Sindhi people in Sindh and with the
mm,
Kashmiris and Mirpuris, etc., and even people in Gilgit Baltistan and other areas. So
mm,
that is how this kind of went on. And then, of course, India and Pakistan fought a couple of wars. One
mm,
was, of course, to create Bangladesh, because there was
mm,
again a lot of persecution of Bengalis that was happening, not just Bengali Hindus, but even Bengali
mm,
Muslims. And Pakistan always treated Bengali Muslims as, almost like an apartheid, untouchables, and
mm,
second class citizens. And of
mm,
course, in 1965, there was a war. And then coming to 1999, in Kargil, there was a war between India and Pakistan. Every time Pakistan tried to
mm,
intrude into India and then had to move back and had to suffer a lot of casualties. In the
mm,
1999 war, of which we are celebrating now the 25th anniversary, Pakistan
mm,
faced a lot of casualties. But a lot of names of those Pakistani army soldiers who were killed were not released to save embarrassment. Even
mm,
today, there are families of Pakistanis who were killed who give interviews to BBC and other platforms and say that our dead bodies or mortal remains of our sons were not returned. In fact, a lot of Pakistani soldiers who were killed on Indian territory,
mm,
Pakistan refused to accept their bodies. Can you imagine that? And this is
mm,
also something that has been recorded. It's not just Indians saying it. Associated Press, BBC, others have
mm,
reported this extensively. There's video evidence.
mm,
And years later, many of these families have contacted independently Indian Army and Indian government and requested them for the mortal remains, and that has been given secretly. It has been given to
mm,
them because Pakistan government, Pakistan Army was not interested. So individually, these families have reached out, and these requests have been respected and given to them.
mm,
Now,
mm,
coming to 87 and 90. Now, this is the time when a fresh kind of insurgency or terrorism began in the Kashmir Valley flank. But
mm,
again, we'll have to go to the context. Many feel that in 1987 there were elections that happened in the Kashmir Valley, and
mm,
that led to a rebellion. Some people who believed in democracy and they were rigged elections, so they picked up arms. But this is not
mm,
all. There was terrorism happening earlier also at the behest of Pakistan. Sometime around 1984, in
mm,
Birmingham, UK, the Assistant High Commissioner of India
mm,
was kidnapped. His name was Ravindra Matre,
mm,
and he was a top Indian diplomat. He was kidnapped by an organization called Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front. They did not admit it, but they made a new name, I think Kashmir Liberation Army or something like that, and went to the
mhm,
Reuters office in 84 and said that we have kidnapped him. And if our
mm,
demands are not met, their top leader was in prison in India and they wanted to
mm,
release him. At that time, Indira Gandhi was India's prime minister.
mm,
And Scotland Yards and, of course, the UK police were after them, and they
mhm,
were, he was kidnapped and kept at a safe place, secret house by the JKLF in Birmingham. Within these
mm.
2 to 3 days, when the terrorists realized that the Scotland Yards could catch them, they killed Ravindra Matre. He was the
Wow.
first Indian diplomat who was killed. And this was Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, created by
Mm,
Amanullah Khan, who was a Pakistani, and this was a
mm,
Pakistani terror organization. This, I say, was one of the first major terror attacks against India's sovereignty, and a
mhm,
representative of India being killed on foreign soil. But even before
mm,
this, somewhere I think around 1971, there was the first Indian hijacking that took place ever. And this was again in Jammu and Kashmir at the Srinagar airport. An aircraft
mhm,
that was called Ganga. It was called Friendship Aircraft Ganga,
mhm,
that was hijacked by a person called Hashim Qureshi and his cousin brother. And the aircraft
mm,
was taken to Pakistan, to Lahore. And in the evening, that aircraft was burned down by the terrorists.
mm,
And later, uh, you know, most of these passengers were released, etc. But Hashim Qureshi spent about 18 years in prison. So this was
mm,
second. Uh, these two incidents happening in 70s and 80s were major, uh, you know,
mm,
wake up call for India that something is brewing. And then
mm,
began the terrorism in around 87, 88, 89. And 89 was the peak when selective targeting of Kashmiri Hindus began.
mhm,
Teachers, judges, lawyers, poets, engineers, anybody who
mm,
was seen as a prominent Kashmiri Hindu voice was killed down. It does not matter what ideology, even leftist,
mm,
Hindus were killed. There was a person called Sarvanand Kaul Premi who was a
mm,
staunch secular person, and he
mm,
lived in Anantnag of South Kashmir, and he was killed mercilessly. His son and he were actually killed mercilessly, and then their bodies were hung on a tree.
mm,
Similarly, there was a lawyer called Tikalal Taplu, one of the most prominent lawyers there. He was killed.
mm,
So many, many such killings happened, hundreds of them, and you will be astonished. In not a
mm.
single case, a terrorist has been convicted for killing Kashmiri
Wow.
Hindus. And so, of course, we blame the Islamists for terrorism, we blame Pakistan, we blame radical separatist organizations. But of course, the
Mm,
Indian government had their duty to file FIR, to report, to file complaint, investigate, and then convict
mhm,
terrorists. Not a single terrorist has been convicted in the last 35 years. Imagine that.
mm,
So this massacre, this killings of Kashmiri Hindus continued from 1990. As I said, my family had to bear the brunt as well. We had to move out. Some of the
mhm,
distant relatives of my father were also killed. In fact, uh, the day my father left, a few days later, terrorists came and they wanted to kidnap my father. And they didn't know where
mm,
he is, so they kidnapped our neighbor and tried to keep him for 3 days on a hill in Srinagar and kept interrogating him about the whereabouts about my father. Thankfully, my father was saved because he wasn't there. My uncle, who was in the
mm,
intelligence bureau, that is the spy organization, domestic spy organization of India. He
Mm-hmm.
was on the hit list as well, and thankfully he was saved. So a lot of people who worked in the government, who worked in the police, who were seen as representatives of India in some way, or prominent personalities, were killed to send across
Mm.
a message that Hindus will not be tolerated. And these Muslim
Wow.
gangsters, these terrorists, almost felt that they will create a Muslim land in Kashmir, and there will be Sharia within days. There were,
Mm.
in fact, slogans, uh, La ilaha illallah, uh, and
Muhammad.
all these slogans that were being raised there.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, when Kashmiri Hindus came out, 500,000 of them, there were a few
Mm.
thousand that were still left in villages and different areas who did not have means to move out.
Means to move.
So
Yeah.
what happened really was there were massacres that happened even years later in Sangrampura, in Vandahama, in Ghoul, in several parts of Kashmir, in South Kashmir, in North Kashmir, and in some ways there was a US president who was coming to India. And just
Mm-hmm.
before he landed, there were around 24 Kashmiri Pandits that were gunned down,
Wow.
including small children. So this continued, and until about 2017, there was Narendra Modi government of BJP that came in 2014, and they had
Mm-hmm.
promised in their manifesto that they will do something different about Kashmir.
Mm-hmm.
In 2014, they came in again. Nothing much happened. In 2017, they gave mandate to the National Investigative Agency, which is the NIA, to investigate
Mm-hmm.
cases of separatists over in Kashmir, and how are they getting funds to have these, shutdowns, law and order situations, stone pelting,
Mm-hmm.
etc.
Mm-hmm.
And later it was realized a lot of Hawala money that was coming in from Pakistan through traders. And a
Mm.
lot of arrests happened from 2017 to 2019. A lot of
Mm.
separatists were arrested as well. In 2019, two of the most radical organizations, Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, that was led by
Mm.
Yasin Malik, was banned, and another called Jamaat-e Islami, which is not just in Kashmir but all across the globe. Jamaat-e Islami is a radical Islamist organization, very well known on what they do,
Mm.
and that
Mm.
was banned as well.
Mm.
And since 2019, there were a lot of changes that were done by the government, and it was decided that things need to change because every time the government used to talk with Pakistan for peace, there were terror attacks
Mm.
that used to happen. There was a major terror attack that happened at the Pathankot Indian Air Force Base, I think around 2015 or 16, I think January
Mm-hmm.
2016. Then there was another attack that happened in Uri Army Camp in North Kashmir. There were
Mm.
similar terror attacks that happened in Nagrota, in India's Punjab, and other places. The
Mm.
biggest of all was the Pulwama terror attack that happened on 14th of Feb 2019, in which more than 40 of our Central Reserve Police Force personnel were killed. And it was a suicide
Mm.
bombing that was done, one of the first suicide bombings, I think second, that happened in Kashmir ever. And
Wow.
there were shock waves across the Kashmir Valley, across India, and Indians wanted that there should be revenge, there should be some action. So a few days
Mm.
later, India did Balakot airstrike against Pakistan. One of the first terror camps of Jaish-e-Mohammed terror organization was completely
Mm.
destroyed, and quite a few terrorists were killed in that attack.
Mm.
But
Mm.
that time, during the Pulwama attack, the government of India took a call that we have tolerated this separatist nonsense, Pakistani uh, deep state, Pakistan army, ISI, fueling trouble in the
Mm.
Kashmir Valley for decades together, and Indian
Mm-hmm.
government has not done much. So,
Mm.
on 5th August 2019, India decided to abrogate or nullify Article 370 and Article 35A. Now, this article gave a special status to Jammu and Kashmir in the last 60, 70 years. And that meant
Mm.
that some of the criteria, for instance, police, for instance, land, law and order,
Mm.
that
Mm.
came in the jurisdiction of the J&K government, not the central government, and
Mm.
that created problems. No other part of India had similar clauses. So 370 was completely taken away. The government of India, the Parliament of India, and later, just last year, the Supreme Court of India also came together and said that Article 370 and 35A cannot be there. It's discriminatory,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever laws are applicable in the rest of India should be applicable in Jammu and Kashmir as well. There should be
Mm-hmm.
equality, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
was done. But of course, radicals, separatists, and particularly Pakistan will not be happy. So they continue to fuel trouble. And
mm,
lastly, I'll tell you that Narendra Modi government came for the third time in June. So on
mm,
9th June, when I was also at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, that is the president's house, and there was swearing
mhm,
in ceremony happening of the prime minister, I got a phone
mhm,
call, and I was told that there's been a huge terror attack in Jammu, in which nine
mm.
Hindu pilgrims have been killed. So again,
Wow.
to send a message internationally that during Prime Minister Modi's swearing-in ceremony, there are nine Hindu pilgrims that are being killed in
And
Jammu.
killed.
So ever since that time, there have been at least 7 to 10 terror attacks in Jammu in the last 2 months. And
Mm,
since in Kashmir it is difficult increasingly for Pakistan to act, they're trying to create a new front in Jammu, kill Hindus, kill minorities, kill
mm,
laborers, and of course
mm,
kill army, jawans, and police to create
mm,
fear psychosis, to create international headlines that Jammu and Kashmir is still a conflict area. But a lot has
mm,
changed. I must tell you, Frank, that in Jammu and Kashmir
mm,
there have been a lot of changes, and for positive, for development, for education, for prosperity,
mhm,
and it will take time because it has seen long conflict. It will take few years to change. Even I feel scared to go to Kashmir because
mm,
Islamists keep threatening me. But I went for the first time with my family just
mm,
last month. I spent a week in the Kashmir Valley. I have of course gone there individually more than 30, 40 times, but
mhm,
this time I went for the first time with my family, and
mm,
it was very emotional for me. It was, I had tears in my eyes, but
mm.
things are slowly moving towards
Slowly
normalcy.
getting
It
better.
will take time. Yeah.
Yeah, I that was a very very concise answer and gives us an idea of what is happening in that region and what radical Islamists are doing there. And I believe the goal of Pakistan and the terror organizations that they are funding in Kashmir is to make the entire region, I guess, part of Pakistan, or at least to make the place like to Islamize the entire region, institute Sharia, and take control of that area. Uh,
Yes.
and of course, as somebody who is a critic of Islam, one thing I keep telling people is that how places become Islamized is always like this. This is how it happens. Or if you remove the violent um, if you remove the violent elements of Islam, if you remove those, it's the possibility of the religion spreading is very, 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 very limited. Right? It's very limited. Islam, for the most part, spreads through violence, and that's what you're trying to do in that region. And it's really sad to see, especially when you talk about people, the attacks on journalists, the attacks on workers, the attacks of any prominent Hindu, especially the ones happening in the 70s and in the 80s in Kashmir, is really, really tragic to see. It's crazy. Like it's really crazy. It reminds whenever I hear any attack by Islamists in any place, it reminds me of what they do in every other place because this is their modus operandi. This is how they operate. They use terror. Terror is one of the tools they use to get whatever they want, and it's really sad. So one thing that I got to learn is that recently there will be an election for the first time, right, in
Yes.
Kashmir, right? So, can you tell us a bit about that and what is the prospect of that? What the future holds for Kashmir with regards to that election?
Well, democracy is being restored, electoral democracy is being restored, and that's huge because one of the complaints both of the regional political parties in Jammu and Kashmir and of course international observers, Pakistan and a lot of others was that there's no democracy, elections are not being held, and for the last 10 years there have been no elections. In fact, I was
Mm,
fortunate to cover the last elections in Jammu and Kashmir that happened in 2014, and these are assembly elections, the state elections that I'm talking about. And at that time, at the peak of winters, then it was freezing. It was -3 temperature. I
mm,
was there, and now elections are being held. Regional political parties, national political parties will be contesting from August to September, and probably late September or early October. Early October, we'll come to know who will form the government. But this is very important and significant because on the Pakistani side, in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, there's no electoral democracy. Pakistan army gets to decide who will be there. And this is a wide known
mm,
fact. Not just in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, funnily so. Also in Pakistan, the central government, federal government of Pakistan, it's only the Pakistan army in Rawalpindi who gets to decide who will be in power. It could be Imran Khan at certain time, who was called Pakistan Army's puppet, and now it's Shahbaz
Mm.
Sharif, brother of Nawaz Sharif, the former prime minister. And in reality, it is the Pakistan Army which is running the government in Pakistan, which is unfortunate because civilians do
Mm-hmm.
not get their rights. Pakistan Army generals get as much money, property, influence, resources, whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
I feel sad for the Pakistani population. But since you also talked about terror, Frank, I want to mention briefly that the world woke up to the reality of terrorism when 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
In 9/11, when at the those trade towers, World Trade Centers, those were breaking. It was shocking visuals. People actually jumping out of the windows, more than 3,000, in fact, killed. And it said shockwaves. The Americans, for the
Mm-hmm.
first time, realized what could be the brutal impact of Islamist terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted action against Al Qaeda, against Osama bin Laden. At that time, it was thought that he's in Afghanistan. So there were attacks carried out.
Mm-hmm.
And later, much, much later in 2008, when the Mumbai 26/11 attacks happened in Mumbai, the
Mm-hmm.
world woke up to a new reality that it's happening in South Asia as well. Now, terrorism was happening in South Asia for years together, but the world for the first time woke up when Mumbai 26/11 happened. I think more than 250 people killed, including Americans, including Israeli Jewish nationals,
Mm-hmm.
including other nationalities. And the world again woke up that there are terror groups residing in Pakistan who are doing this for years together, and there needs to be action. But yet,
Yeah.
unfortunately, Frank, I have to mention there are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
Western countries, and in particular, I'm talking about US, Canada, and UK, still do
Mm-hmm.
not understand the consequences and the realities of Islamist terrorism. They still
True.
do not realize that how radicalization at the roots of it is a huge, huge problem that propels this Islamist terrorism. Now you
Mm-hmm.
see what's happening in UK. Now you see
Mm-hmm.
what's happening on the streets of Europe all across. In
Mm-hmm.
Sweden, in Germany, in all other places, there are stabbing
Mm-hmm.
attacks. There are lone
Yes.
wolf attacks. In
Mm-hmm.
Nice, in Paris, in France, there are trucks that are being rammed into innocent people. Who are doing
True.
this? There are
These are radical.
Islamist radicalized individuals or groups who see themselves as Al Qaeda or ISIS or some kind of Islamist radical thought process and are
Mm-hmm.
doing this. When will Europe, when will the Western world realize the consequences of this and act? Now, I do feel some tremors of realization, but I still feel that this realization hasn't come in. Until it
Yeah.
knocks on your door and you feel the impact of this brutal force, unfortunately, you will not see what is coming your way. So I
Yeah.
think, you know,
Yeah. Go
the
ahead.
kind of suicide bombings that are happening in Pakistan or what's been seen in Kashmir or in
Mm.
Syria will be
Mm.
happening in Europe as well if they do not
True.
counter this radicalization. Now, I'm not against immigrants. Now, I'm not against migrants. But you
Mm-hmm.
have to have a system. You can't have a blanket opening of your borders for everyone. That's why India is mindful of the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan was taken over by Taliban. But
Mm-hmm.
India did not open its door to each and every person. There were Afghans that were rescued. They were given valid visa. They were given shelter. But that does
Mm.
not mean that a huge chunk of population will suddenly appear and will be
Mm.
allowed. There are
Mm.
radicalization concerns. There are security concerns. Similarly, with Bangladesh, what's been happening over the last few weeks, and
Mm.
again, a lot of Bangladeshis want to come to India. That is great. A lot of Rohingya
Mm-hmm.
refugees from Myanmar want to come to India. That's great. Perhaps they see India as the only secular, democratic country in this part of the world. But
Mm-hmm.
we need to be mindful of our national security, our strategic interests as well. We are
Mm-hmm.
empathetic. We
Mm-hmm.
believe in humanity. We will
Mm-hmm.
give shelter, but at our own concerns when our security concerns are met.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. When you were mentioning all the terror attacks, I remember the when over 300 girls were kidnapped in Nigeria, the Chibok girls that were kidnapped, over 300 of them. People were surprised when it happened. I remember how the whole world reacted to that. And it's also, so in northern Nigeria, we've had multiple terror attacks against some against Christians, some even against other sets of Islam. Funny enough, though you have Iran, that is a Shia nation. In Nigeria here, Shias are being attacked as well. So
You
by
know,
by majority Sunni
Frank,
population.
just one sentence. In the last 3 days, in the last
Mm,
3 days, there's been a huge terror attack in Burkina Faso. There are more than 200 people who've been killed. There are 140 that are injured, and this is a
mm,
group called, I think, Muslimin, who is they are affiliated to Al Qaeda. And there's no global media coverage. Of course, global media, the BBC, Al Jazeera, Washington Post, CNN, they are focused on
mhm,
Israel-Hamas war. Of course, that is also being escalated by Hezbollah and Hamas now, and
mhm,
Russia-Ukraine. But what about
mm.
Burkina Faso? Are they lesser human? Are they
That is
these dead bodies of innocents not important? So that is the
that
double
is that
standards
is
of the international media also.
yeah, that is one thing that I point out on my channel over and over. You get news, not just Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali. These three states have been like suffering seriously from not just one, multiple Islamic terror organizations that are operating in these three countries. You have
Absolutely.
Sudan that is facing a serious humanitarian crisis currently ongoing. You have the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Christian villages are constantly being targeted and people are getting killed. And you rarely see this on major news. They don't talk about it. They don't. It's not news. And even when they talk about it, it's like one of those things, one of those articles that you find on the last page or close to the last page. Something that is not really significant. I remember, and then there's Al Jazeera that I have a major issue with. I remember when in December last year, 24th of December, that's on Christmas Eve, a village in Jos, Nigeria was attacked. Over one over let me be accurate, let me not exaggerate, but let me give a conservative figure. Over 200 people were killed, but it's more than that. More than 200 were killed. And when Al Jazeera was covering this, they said the conflict had to do with climate change. I kid you not. They said this was climate change induced conflict. I'm like, no, this is radical Islamic group attacking a village in just Nigeria. It has nothing to do with climate change. But that is how Al Jazeera is going to cover this. And of course, everybody know that they are the mouthpiece of Qatar. And Qatar is
You
a
know,
huge funder of terrorist organizations.
Frank, since you mentioned Al Jazeera, I'll give you two examples. One, of course, everybody knows, people who are watching us right now, that
Mm-hmm.
Al Jazeera is the spokesperson of Hamas. There's no
True.
doubt about it. Hamas leaders are coming to Al Jazeera, they're almost scolding the anchors. And it almost
Mm-hmm.
feels that Hamas spokespersons are anchors of Al Jazeera. And that's very
Mm-hmm.
unfortunate. That's sad. Perhaps there'll be some introspection that the deep state in Qatar does, that these negotiations are okay between terror groups and states, but you
Mm-hmm.
cannot you cannot be spokespersons of terror organizations who are killing innocent people. Secondly, this in 2019-20, I was in US,
Mm-hmm.
and there was an interesting act that was brought in by the Indian government, and it was called Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA. And
Mm-hmm.
this act gave persecuted minorities of Islamist countries in India's neighborhood, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, right to seek refuge in India.
Mm-hmm.
What has happened over the years, that a lot of minorities, Hindus, Christians, Parsis, Sikh, Jains, etc., from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan have come to India, but are staying here either illegally or they are seeking temporary visas, etc. So what the Indian government did was they brought in the CAA and said that minorities in Islamist republics, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and I again say Islamist republics because in these countries Islam is the priority. Muslims are the priority. Minorities are not treated equally as Muslims
True.
in education, in jobs, in opportunities, in any kind of funding. It's only the
Mm.
Muslims who have the first right. So when
True.
they were being persecuted, when they were being converted, killed, kidnapped, forcibly married, Indian government took this step. But what did Al Jazeera do? What did international press do? They said, "Oh, this is a communal act. This is against
Mm.
Muslims. This will be hurt Indian Muslims and Muslims in the continent." How will this hurt? Now, a lot of fake news, a lot of disinformation was spread
Mm-hmm.
around CAA. Now, the same champions of freedom of expression, the same champions of that equality and democracy who give lecture to
mm,
Indians and global South were completely spreading misinformation, and they were saying that CAA is biased and communal, and should there should be equal law for all. Minorities shouldn't be specific, etc. And then
mhm,
there was a huge protest that was held in India by Muslims and the leftist groups together, saying that we
mhm,
will not tolerate CAA. So Indian government had to postpone it. But I'm
mm,
glad now that the Indian government has CAA, is giving citizenship to persecuted minorities. Because even
mhm,
today, when you look at Pakistan, in a place like Sindh, there's a Muslim preacher called Mia Mithu who's
mm,
converting 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old Hindu girls, Christian
mm,
girls, Parsi girls, and girls from Sikh community, and they are
mhm,
forcefully married to Muslims, and this is what is happening. Similarly, the situation in Bangladesh, ever since Sheikh Hasina had to flee, Frank,
mhm,
you've seen
mhm,
attacks against minorities. And now, again, global press is saying, no, this is fake news. Nothing of this sort is happening.
mhm.
Everything is hunky dory. Oh, it's a democratic takeover. How is it a democratic takeover when there's a violent mob that is killing people, that is
People
forcibly
attacking them.
removing the prime minister to leave? And then you have an
Mhm.
interim government of people who have not been elected, who are perhaps some call them CIA agents, some call them other agents, but there's no
Mhm.
democracy right now in Bangladesh, and
True.
Hindus again become a target. There's a musician called Rahul Ananda
Mhm.
who is a secular person again. He does not belong to one ideology or the other. Staunchly
Mhm.
secular. The French president Emmanuel Macron had gone to his house because it's a
Mhm.
140-year-old ancient, important historical structure there. And he was one of the first persons who was attacked. His 140-year-old house was completely gutted. He had
Mhm.
3,000 musical instruments, which he had himself crafted. They were
Mhm.
gutted completely. His furniture was taken away. His property, everything was gutted completely. What
Yeah,
was his democracy?
and all of that was obviously in the name of democracy,
Yeah,
according
this
to
was a
Western.
democratic takeover. 40 to 50 Hindu temples have been destroyed. There are
Mhm.
Hindu counselors, there are Hindu journalists who have been killed, there are Hindu policemen who have been killed. And they are saying,
Mm.
no, this is anger on the streets, this is anger coming out. We can't do much about it. It's
Yeah,
public anger coming out. This is a democratic takeover. Is this the democracy of the Western press? It's
Mhm.
shocking,
Yeah,
unbelievable.
I remember one of the news articles from Al Jazeera that I responded to with regards to what happened. I think it's still happening in Bangladesh, where they accused the Indian media of Islamophobia in their coverage of what's happening in Bangladesh. Will you believe it? You are covering Muslims killing Hindus. The Muslims are the ones killing the Hindus, but any person covering the killing is Islamophobic, according to Al Jazeera. And I was like, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. There are so many things you mentioned that I want to circle back to. That one of the things you said was you talked about how the West, especially places like Europe, and illegal migration, and how they freely allow migrants and refugee seekers from northern Nigeria, northern Africa, rather, not northern Nigeria, from northern African countries, from Tunisia, from Morocco, from Algeria, even from Libya, that is also another hotbed of terrorism in in North Africa. So they just open their arms and they accept these people. And no, in fact, I don't even know if there's any check put in place to veto who should come in or who should not come in. I think all of them are just brought in. Nobody is sent back. And you said that the likelihood in the future is that they are going to begin to see more terror attacks, like suicide bombers, bombings, killings, like what is happening in the countries. But what do you think the UK do to? Although, of course, we don't want to focus so much on the UK. We'll get back to South Asia. But what do you think the UK should do to, or people in the UK? What should they do to ensure that their government wake up and realize, look, there is a problem, and what should the solution look like? That's kind of what I'm
A
asking.
short and simple answer, Frank. The
Mm-hmm,
UK Prime Minister, the UK government need to apply
mm-hmm,
their mind. They need to, have logic. If they continue to allow people blindly without any, filters, then you will see the kind of deadly violence that you're seeing on the streets. You will see increase in radicalization. You see these grooming gangs now in UK that are
mm,
raping, young British girls
mhm,
who would be again forcibly converted, married off, who knows? But now
mhm,
the civilians are vigilant enough; they are acting. But I'll give you an
mm,
example. It's not just UK and Europe. In Canada as well. In Canada, what has happened, Frank, is that for years together they have allowed a segment of the Sikh population, and these Sikh population have been doing Khalistani terrorism, and a lot of them
mm,
are hand in gloves with Pakistan as well. In India, there is no Khalistan. In India, there are no Sikh separatists who want
mm,
any kind of division or have grievances against the Indian government, because everything is democratic and they have democratic avenues. But Canada
mm,
has been doing this for years together and is not acting against terror groups who have now become a problem because they are gangsters. There are gang
mm,
wars taking place on Canadian soil. In fact, I've been
mm,
speaking to locals there, journalists, etc., in Canada, who say situation is worse. In fact, Canada was being seen as one of the countries in the world where people want to go. They want to get a permanent
mhm,
residency and have education, jobs, etc. But now people are fleeing away from Canada because there's so much of violence. Khalistani terrorists are getting a safe haven. There are
mhm,
Hamas-linked, Iranians, Hezbollah-linked Iranians who are getting safe asylum. There are against,
mhm,
this latest example that came up in the parliament as well. A man who was in the ISIS and had killed
mm.
people was given a safe shelter in Canada, was
Wow.
given asylum, political asylum in Canada. And now they've realized and woken up to it. This is the same Canada that I'm talking about, where a member of the Nazi group was invited
Mm.
in the parliament, and they
Yeah,
were,
I saw that.
by the prime
He
minister,
got a standing ovation.
Justin Trudeau. He got standing ovation. Can you imagine that? This is the level of, blindness that the Canadians have,
Yeah,
and Justin
yeah.
Trudeau is failing to act. Justin Trudeau, I think, his days are numbered in the sense that the opposition might come into power, and similar is the situation in UK. On the streets
Mhm,
of London, you are seeing these protesters, who are demanding their rights and against immigrants. But you see the
mm,
other side. There are now people coming with faces covered with masks, and then
mm,
clashing with these protesters. They are burning
mm,
places, impacting, public infrastructure. But people
mm,
who are criticizing this are being arrested. Now, what we are seeing, the Steimer government in UK, for a Facebook post, you will get imprisoned for 8 months.
mm,
If you criticize somebody or if you have expressed your anger, you will be
mm,
jailed for 1 year or 2 year. So this is the
mm,
level of so-called freedom of expression or democracy that we are
mm,
witnessing in UK. I
mm,
think a year ago, 1.5 years ago, there was an attack by Khalistani groups again in UK
mm.
against the Indian High Commission, and the British government said that we'll act, but all the perpetrators were not arrested. So now this is, Indians know how to deal with it because we have suffered for this terrorism and radicalization for a very long time.
Mm.
The UK people, the British people, Americans, Europeans need to realize what are the consequences of this, because if they do not do so, this radicalization is going to eat them up completely and chew them
Mm.
for breakfast. Because
Mm.
there's so much of radicalization, there's so much of hatred. They do not believe in any kind of democracy. They do not believe in co-aligning or co-living with Christians,
Resistance.
Jews, Hindus, Sikh, etc. They want, their goal is one. They want to be in power.
Mm.
They want a Sharia law, and they want an Islamic society. Is this what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wants in Canada? Is this what Biden or Kamala Harris want in US? Is this what Steimer wants in UK? They will have to take a call, because if they don't act
Sure.
today in the interest of their citizens, tomorrow it's going to be very difficult, and they are going to knock on their doors.
That's true. That's 100% true. And I think it's, if there's one message anybody needs to understand when it has to do with Islam in wherever, or Muslims, for the most part, Islamists, any name you want to call them. I usually say I don't know where the Muslim end and where the where the Islamists begin. It's hard to tell where. I mean, if you ask the average Muslim, do you believe that a black an apostate should be killed? If they say yes, are they not Islamists by definition? Then are they not Islamists? Is this not somebody who wants Sharia law? So for me, I would say whether they are Muslims, Islamists, any place where Islam is, what Islam intends to do. The religion, not a radical interpretation. It's just the religion. What it intends to do is to take over. Okay, is to take over, is to be predominant. That's what you find in the scriptures, the Islamic scriptures. What you find in the Quran is what you find in the Hadith. Is what they've been commanded to do. To go, if when they take over a place, the people in that place have two options, right? Especially if you're not a Jew or a Christian, you have two options: it's either you convert or you die, and that's what their prophet have told them to do, and that's what they're going to do. You know, I want to ask you, the people in Kashmir, especially those who have suffered under, these terror attacks, and even the Hindus, because I believe there are Hindus in the Pakistani controlled area of Kashmir. What is the future for those people? What will you tell those people in those regions? Like, what do you think is the way forward for those who have, who are victims of this constant attacks from terrorists, from radical Islamists? And what is the way forward? What does the future hold for them? Will there ever come a day in Kashmir where these attacks will be limited, even in the Indian control region? Like, will it be possible where there will be a day where the attacks will be limited, restricted, and what would lead to that day? That's kind of like the
I'll come to
question.
this, Frank. I'll come to this because I'm reading a lot of comments as well. One point
Okay.
that I need to make, on Islam, on Islamist terrorism, on radicalization in particular, there's a huge debate also happening in the Islamic society. You know,
Mm,
Ever since last 10 months, there's a war that is brewing in Gaza between Israel and Hamas that began on 7th October when the terror attacks took place,
mhm,
unprecedented terror attacks in southern Israel, in which close to 1,500 people were killed. But very interestingly, when Israel entered, invaded Gaza, and tried to attack Hamas, there was of
mm,
course a lot of refugee crisis. People want to move out, but
mm.
are the Muslim countries in the neighborhood taking these refugees? What is the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan doing? They are
You're
saying,
not even
no, we are
allowed.
concerned, we will condemn this. But we will send a lot of humanitarian aid. There should be humanitarian pause. Israel cannot do this. We will not tolerate this by any level. But they will not take the
Mhm,
refugees. Why will they
mm,
not take the refugees? Because they are scared. More than
mhm,
Israel, more than any other part of the world, more than any democratic society, UAE, Saudi, Egypt, and Jordan are scared that
mhm,
there would be Islamist radical elements from the Hamas who have been in Gaza, who will enter their society and corrupt them, who will enter and
mhm,
radicalize their population. And that's why
mhm,
Saudi and UAE, we saw extreme measures being taken, not just in the
mhm,
last 10 months, but for last few years, that you
mhm,
do whatever you want under the law, under whatever guidelines and constitution we have, but you will not be tolerated to create any kind of separatism in the name of Islam. We will
mhm,
tell you. We are the guardians in Saudi. We are the guardians of the two holy mosques, and we will tell you how to go about it. No radicalization, no hate preaching will be tolerated. Why
mhm,
such double standards is the question. Now, if you are actually talking about the Muslims and saying that Israel cannot do this, you accept them, you have them there. So this is the kind of debate that's happening, and in reality, UAE
mm,
and Saudi actually want to build bridges with Israel. They want to have relations because today we are living in a world, Frank, where economic interest, business
mm,
interest, trade interest is the topmost priority. That's why, in our part of the world, Pakistan is suffering because its
mhm,
foreign policy is based only on India, hating India, on killing Indians, on invading Jammu and Kashmir. They don't want prosperity for their people. They don't want their
mhm,
economy or GDP to rise.
mhm,
So, as of now, you know, India is not a Muslim country. India is a secular country, even though we have,
mm,
I think, second or third highest Muslims in the world. But UAE, Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait, Maldives, all the Muslim countries in the world want better ties
mm,
with India because they know that economic prosperity is with India, not with
mhm,
Pakistan, not with Bangladesh or any other country. So this
mm,
is the reality that we need to understand as well. So that there are countries in the Middle East who are now understanding in the last few years the reality of Islamist radicalization and are
mhm,
only governed by economic interest and nothing else.
mm. That's true. That's true. That's true. I mean, you see it a lot with Saudi Arabia. in the last couple of years. We see it with the UAE. They realize that I think one of the things that make these countries different is that they realize that like somebody said, you cannot have a revolution without money.
Yeah.
You cannot Islamize the whole world without money. That is how it works. You cannot, and whatever Islamic agenda you have needs money. So if you want the money, then maybe you have to be less Islamic. And they're like, okay, can we bring down the temperature when it has to do with radical Islam so that we can thrive as a society? Can we bring down the temperature when it has to do with we have to take over the world and so that we can have money? Because making your citizens better, having a better life for your people is really important, which
True.
is something in Islam known as dunya. Anyway, so
But
back to the
but
question I
but
asked about people in,
yeah,
in
I'll, I'll
Kashmir.
I'll come to your question now. There are no Hindus left in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. That's the reality.
Mm,
There are Hindus, a few thousand now in the Indian part of Kashmir, but they are also there only because they have jobs there. They are poor. They do not have any other means, or they are in the
mm,
government.
mm,
About Hindus who are living in Pakistan, they desperately want to come to India. There are
mm,
still forced conversions happening, in particular in Sindh.
mm,
A lot of cases that come in every other day, and they contact Indian NGOs, Indian organizations to rescue them, and there are rescue
mm,
efforts that continue even today.
mm.
But as I said, there are a lot of Hindus in Pakistan and Bangladesh both who want to return to India. And in Afghanistan, the situation is such that there are no Hindus left. There are a few Sikh who are left. Sikh have also left completely. But there are a few
Mm,
Sikh left who are in good terms with the Taliban and they continue to stay there. But mostly Hindus and Sikhs have left Afghanistan. So there's hardly left.
mm.
Taliban is enjoying their time there. They're not giving girls education. They are trying to
Well,
have their own
did you see their
Sharia
recent
law.
law? Did you see their recent law on women where they said women, yeah, it's Afghanistan. They said the new law for moralities, the new morality law that they are implementing in Afghanistan says women should be covered, fully covered, and that they should not be heard. That the voice of a woman should not be heard. That is it is going to promote indecency. So women should not be seen and they should not be
Yeah.
heard. And
One of the Afghan anchors asked this question to a minister in the
mm,
Taliban Emirati cabinet, and
mm,
the question was that when are you going to give education to the girls? When can we expect the girls to return to classes? And you know what the response was? He
turn off
started
the
laughing.
camera.
He started no, he started laughing. He said, "What a ridiculous question! How can you even ask me this question?" So this is the reality of Taliban. And again, in this Afghanistan case, US has completely failed. I mean, the
Yeah.
kind of surrender that Americans did in Vietnam, in
Mm,
Afghanistan, it was worse. Those
mm,
visuals of American C-130 Hercules aircraft flying
mm,
off from Kabul's airport, and then
mm,
people swinging onto it. Imagine the kind of fear they had. Imagine the kind of killings that would have happened later, just like we see in
mm,
Iran also these days, unfortunately. So Taliban
mm,
has its way, but Americans used Afghanistan for 20 years and then perhaps destroyed it further without rescuing it because
mm,
they always have their idea of democracy in mind. They cannot understand the local traditions and practices and cannot adopt to the democratic values locally. For instance, in India, there's a
mm.
democracy in a different way that functions. But Americans somehow have this blindness and faith towards their idea of democracy that they want to implement wherever they go.
Yeah, and they keep, which is one thing I see in America. They keep thinking that everybody thinks like them.
Yeah,
It's like there's this mindset. If we treat everybody's just thinking like us, I'm like, no, there are many people who don't think the way you think. They don't value what you value. They don't hold dear the things you hold dear. They don't share the
exactly.
same values as you do. You need, and it's a true reality that people in the West need to understand. There's so many people in the world who don't want the same thing that you want. You know, it's the same thing when we talk about religion. I believe that the average Westerner believes that religion is majorly peaceful because they think every religion is like Christianity, and I'm like, no, some religion
Yeah,
is not like it's not like Christianity at all. It's not my personal devotion with God. Some religion believe in community devotion to God. It's a community affair, you know. So, anyways, I hope that they will eventually realize that. Now, let's talk about Bangladesh and what happened recently. Walk us through how what led to the protest, how the former prime minister had to resign and basically escape, and also the violence that resulted and how Hindus were targeted. Talk to us about that.
Bangladesh also has a very interesting history. It was created in the,
Mm,
I think, 1971, when
mm,
the Pakistan army, which was there, engaged in brutal killings, persecution, etc. And then several groups and politicians came to India and requested for help. And at that
mm,
time, the Indira Gandhi government, the government of India, decided that we will help Bangladesh. We will help, in fact, East Pakistan at that time. And then,
mm,
of course, there was a lot of persecution, unfortunately, that happened, as I talked about, against the Bengalis, ethnic
mm,
Bengalis, Hindus, and Muslims. A lot of women were raped, and this I'm talking about in hundreds of thousands.
mm,
Unfortunately, a lot of Bengalis actually migrated to India as well. And this is how Bangladesh was created. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who is now called the father of Bangladesh, was also killed during this
mm,
entire period. And most of his family members were also killed. And then, of course, they had a troubled history. There was democracy, but there was dictatorship as well. And
mm,
through this entire time, there were two ladies, especially in the last 2 decades, that came to the front. One was Sheikh Hasina of the
mm,
Awami League, and second was Begum Zia Khalida from the Bangladesh nationalist movement. Now, Awami
mm,
League is seen more of a pragmatic, more secular in their belief. The
mm,
BNP is considered pro or leaning towards Islamists, radicals. And then, of course, there's the Jamaat-e-Islami, who we cannot escape, who are everywhere. And but they're not as powerful as the BNP and the Awami League used to be. But then,
mm,
of course, there was a political struggle between the two. uh, Sheikh Hasina, because power corrupts, wanted to have power forever, and
mm,
started taking this very seriously in the form of going ahead of democracy, taking steps that were beyond democracy against Khalida Zia,
mm,
who was arrested, who was imprisoned, and a lot of BNP leaders because they wanted to completely destroy the opposition. In the entire
mm,
process, a lot of bloggers were arrested, a lot of critics of the government were arrested as well. And in the meanwhile, in her speech, she was close to India bilaterally. She said that she was acting against all those who were targeting minorities, but there wasn't
mm,
much action that was really witnessed. A lot of people escaped Bangladesh also during this entire period. So, a lot of people now say that Sheikh Hasina was a democratic leader who was secular as well, but she had become a democratic dictator. So there wasn't democracy as one would have expected in Bangladesh. But in this entire process, India, because it played a very predominant role in creation of Bangladesh, had very
mm,
important strategic ties with Bangladesh. But in the last few months, there were protests that escalated by the students of Bangladesh who saw this quota system that was reservation for those family members of veterans and freedom fighters who died during the creation of Bangladesh. And they
mm,
wanted to remove this reservation because it's been a lot of years and it doesn't make sense.
mhm,
Interestingly, it wasn't Sheikh Hasina who brought in this quota. It was a High Court order that came in, and a
mm,
quota was. Sheikh Hasina was also against this quota, but this led to anger towards Sheikh Hasina, towards this government, and even when the quota
mhm,
system, there was course correction, and quota system was, I think, halted. The protests
mhm,
still continued. There was a second wave of protests happening, in which not just students, but student groups of all the political parties, the Jamaat, the BNP, others also joined in. And this time they
mm,
demanded that Prime Minister should resign, or situation
mhm,
will escalate further. In this entire
mm,
process, on that particular Sunday and Monday, I think it was around 4th or 5th of July, when we
mhm,
saw, or August, or July actually, in which we saw many of the protesters attacking police stations. There were at least 200 to
mhm,
300 police stations that were targeted and burned completely. As I said, there were more than 40 temples that were destroyed.
mm,
Hindus that were targeted as well. In fact, I had a part of my family, extended family, staying in Dhaka, and they were scared for
mm,
a week. They did not come out of their
mm,
homes. And when the students actually reached the doors of the prime minister's house, the prime minister had no other way but to escape. So she took a
mm,
helicopter and left for India, and gradually we had the takeover of an interim government. Now, again, this interim government is not chosen by the people of Bangladesh. This is just the students or the people who seem to have command right now. They have chosen,
mm,
and interim government likely is to be for 3 months, and then elections are to take place. But I'm not. I won't be surprised if there will be no elections in the coming days, because, again, power corrupts, and whoever
mhm,
is in power would want to stay on till whatever time, because there have been phases of interim governments earlier also for Bangladesh, which have lasted
mm,
for a couple of years. So I'm not
mm,
sure if 3 months would be the time. Now,
mhm,
Russia, interestingly, has accused US, not now,
mhm,
but in November and December last year, that
mhm,
Americans and American CIA is doing something in Bangladesh, and they want to remove Sheikh Hasina. Now,
mm,
the history is that Americans wanted to create a naval air base at a place called Saint Martin Island in Bangladesh. When the Americans,
mm,
for the last few years, requested Sheikh Hasina for this, Sheikh Hasina said that nothing doing. I cannot allow this because this
mm,
compromises the sovereignty and the national goals and national security priorities of Bangladesh. And the
mm,
Americans, interestingly, because of the geographical location, strategic location of St. Martin Islands in Bangladesh, wanted to have a naval air base to keep a check on China. But
mhm.
Bangladesh refused completely. So the Americans perhaps decided to teach a lesson. Now, I don't know what the reality is. This is what some of the
This is what
Awami
the Russians
lawmakers
have
say.
said.
This is what the Russians have said. This is all out in media. And interestingly,
Mm,
there are WikiLeaks pages also back in 2006, 2008, where
mm,
the current head of the interim government in Bangladesh, Mohammad Yunus, was
mm,
regularly meeting US diplomats and regularly expressing desire to enter politics. And one such
mm,
conversation was, I think, with the deputy chief of the mission in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, where
mm,
I think the deputy chief asked, "Would you want to join politics?" And he said, "Of course, but I don't know how to do it. For me to
mm,
join politics, we'll have to remove these two women." And perhaps jokingly, he said that these two
mm,
women would have to be sent on some UN mission out of Bangladesh. So he
mm,
always had this in mind. And we know that regime change measures are taken by CIA. So I don't know the reality. Perhaps years from now, somebody will write a book and reveal what the reality of the so called revolution. Just like Gene Sharp mentions in the book, Democracy Through Dictatorship, there is color
mm,
revolution that happens.
mm,
In this time, this was
mm.
so called student revolution. But we will know what the reality is perhaps in future.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of this that I've not really had anybody talk about. Wow. So there's even the likelihood of this being the hands of the doings of the CIA. Interesting. Interesting. So of course, people are fleeing Bangladesh. There are Hindus who are fleeing, and I don't know the rate at which they are being allowed to enter into India. And but currently, I don't know what it is currently. Like, I mean, past few days has the violence reduced? How was the state of Bangladesh now? Are Hindus safe now in the country?
Well, over the last few days, no major attacks have taken place, but there's the
Okay.
fear angle, there's the fear psychosis,
Mm,
because it's unpredictable. Because what happens in such a situation when nobody is in power, nobody is in
mm,
charge, there's no government, there's no governance, there's no police, then
mhm,
radical elements take control. What they did was in places like Sirajganj in
mm.
Bangladesh, Hindus were lynched, and their
Wow.
bodies were hung again. There's a person called Harudan Roy, who was an Awami League councillor, who was killed. There was a Hindu journalist called Pradeep Bomik with Daily
Mm,
Khabar Patra, a newspaper in Bangladesh, who was killed. Again, there were ISKCON temple, which is one of the most famous Hindu temples in the world, that was attacked in Bangladesh. So there is a fear psychosis. People do not know what to do. Like my family, they have returned to India. They don't know
mm,
when they will go back. So there are a lot of similarly who have moved and do not know what to do in future. So
mm,
this unpredictability will remain till the time there is a government in power and the government does some measures, because the interim government also will have to ensure peace and stability, and that is lacking. What we also witnessed is around our borders, a lot of Hindu villagers wanted to come to India. So again, there's a fear psychosis that there could be massacre, there could be targeted killings against the minorities, and it's not just Hindus. Christians are feeling unsafe equally. Unfortunately, the global media is not talking about Christians and the Ahmadiyas, who are
mm,
Muslims but are not considered Muslims by the Muslim community. So Ahmadiyas are facing attacks just like in Pakistan and Bangladesh as well, by the
mm,
Jamaat-e-Islam and other radical elements. So it's a problem in our neighborhood. In diplomatic language, it was in many ways a strategic disappointment for India, because Bangladesh for long has been a very close partner, and the current
mhm,
regime, which is mostly of BNP and Jamaat and others, do not see eye to eye with India, and they see India as a problem because India was close to Sheikh Hasina. And interestingly, Frank, India
mm,
is the country that now gives safe shelter to Sheikh Hasina. Not Americans, not British people, because and that also raises a lot of eyebrows, because Sheikh Hasina's sister is a British national. Her family stays in UK. Sheikh
mm,
Hasina's son stays in US, but yet both UK and US seem to have refused her safe shelter. In fact, US, she had a valid visa. That visa was cancelled. Imagine the level of insecurity or whatever they have for Sheikh Hasina, or the revenge that they
mm,
wanted. So Sheikh Hasina is stranded on an Indian Air Force base for over more than 20 days now. It's been more than three
mm,
weeks and doesn't know where to go, because in India it would be problematic if she stays, because Bangladesh
mm,
will see India as a enemy then, and India of course wouldn't want Sheikh Hasina to continue to stay here for long. But she
mm,
doesn't have any other place to go. She doesn't have, as of now, a passport of any other country, because Bangladeshis have cancelled her passport, and she doesn't have visa of any other country or an approval for a political asylum. So
she's a refugee.
she's a no citizen, nobody's citizen, and nobody's political asylum right now, and
Wow,
just continues to wait.
that is really tragic. I didn't even know that even the former prime minister is in serious trouble. That is interesting. That is really really interesting. So at what rate are the Hindus in Bangladesh able at, because I the last time I read about conflict, you also said that India is being careful with who they let in. So I believe that there are
Yes.
many Hindus in Bangladesh who want to move into India. But so, what is the rate at which they are able to get into India and find safe haven in India?
Very slowly. I think as of now, I think I won't say it has stopped, but there's a
Mm,
temporary halt that was made on the visas. Even the visa center was closed for a couple of
mm,
weeks, but now the visa center is opened, but very selective visas are being given.
mm,
Perhaps work permits or emergency visas or medical visas. Uh,
mm,
People who want to stay or take a political asylum, I'm not so sure that it would be done within days. It could take time, because you remember that India doesn't refuse, but as I said, has to keep national security priority in mind. In the past, for
mm,
last many years, we have the Bangladeshi very famous author called Taslima Nasreen,
mm,
who is in India, who stays in Delhi, because she was being targeted by Islamist elements when she wrote a novel and criticized Islam. She calls herself
mm,
an atheist. She was a born Muslim, and continues to, and she's against Sheikh Hasina as well. In fact, she was celebrating when Sheikh Hasina came to India, because she said, Sheikh Hasina's time I had to leave Bangladesh and run for my
mm.
life, and now Sheikh Hasina is running for her life. So it's a problematic situation. It's same. I mean, if you pander to the Islamists, if you continue to speak their language or continue to let them be, then of course you
Mm,
become a victim in that entire process. So it's a complicated situation in Bangladesh as of now, and it will
mm,
take time to stabilize. And all eyes are on the interim government chief, Mohammad Yunus, what he does, or what he
mm.
uh, really wants to achieve. Uh, Days ahead will say more.
Yeah. There's something you said that I think is even another lesson that people and also leaders of the world, they don't watch my live stream. But if there's one of them watching that become a future leader of the world tomorrow, one thing you need to learn about pampering Islamists is they might be your friends today, but they're not going to be your friends for long. You might help them achieve whatever they want to achieve, but it's not going when they become the majority, they will come for you. They will
You
definitely
know,
come. It happens. Yeah, go ahead.
Frank, the perfect example that comes to my mind right now is from Afghanistan and Pakistan. Because for long, Pakistan gave safe shelter to a group called Haqqani Network, which is part of the Taliban. And
Mm,
uh, in the northern areas, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and other places, the Haqqani
mm,
network or the Taliban used to stay for years together. US had raised concerns, but Pakistanis, being Pakistanis, used to give them shelter. And
mm,
this was an understanding that when Taliban comes to power in Afghanistan again, then
mm,
Pakistan will have a larger say, and Taliban will work as per Pakistan's interest.
mm,
But what happened?
mm,
It's been 3 years that Taliban has been in Afghanistan, and
mhm.
now there are clashes happening between the Pakistan army and the Taliban at the Durand line
But,
at the border. Taliban is activating their Pakistani Taliban. They are now asking the
mm,
Pakistani Taliban to take control. And TTP, which is the Pakistani Taliban, has done more terror attacks in the last three
mm,
years than ever before. So the Pakistan ISI and the Pakistan army are in doldrums. And imagine the Pakistan ISI chief, Faiz Hamid, who did negotiations with the Taliban and the US at that time,
mm.
has been arrested by the Pakistan army now. He's in prison, and there's a military, court martial that has happened. So this is how
Mhm,
things change in Pakistan. There's a new regime
mhm,
in power, so old people are out, and Afghanistan are mocking. Afghan Taliban is mocking Pakistanis, and they're saying, "Who are
mhm,
you? We have our own foreign policy. We have territorial integrity, and we are
mhm.
next coming for Pakistan now."
You see? There it is. There it is. There it is. See, this is something that I've seen even in Nigeria. Let me give you a brief Nigerian example. So there was a time we had a president from the south part of Nigeria. Nigeria has like 6 regions. So we had a president from the south part of Nigeria. And the Muslims in the north didn't like it. They didn't like him. Even the Muslims in the western part of the country didn't like him. They did not like him at all, right? And it was during his regime that Boko Haram became prominent. And I believe strongly that villages in the north, we are giving Boko Haram cover. They were even enabling them because they thought it will weaken the presidency of this person from the south. They did not like him. So Boko Haram became strong, became powerful, became like in fact got global recognition, right? And the president then looked weak, looked incompetent, looked like somebody who didn't know what he was doing. And he was the only president in recent history that only had one term, and he was not re-elected. The next
Right.
president, okay, now I'm president. The next president that came after him was from the north. He was a Muslim. Everybody from the north was like, "This is our guy." And they thought, okay, now that he's in power, Boko Haram will calm down. No, Boko Haram tied it up. They tripled. They kidnapped more people. They
Yeah.
made Buhari look like a fool. They made the president look like a very big moron, like he did not know what. And the funny thing is that he even got 8 years because Muslims are going to vote Muslims. He got 8 years,
Yeah.
for 2 terms, but 2 terms of complete insecurity in the north. Complete. More people were kidnapped, more violent, more suicide bombing, more everything. So
Yeah.
maybe they might be a tool for you now. But believe me, they are not. They don't have your interest. They are not going to be like, "Oh, we'll return the favor." No, for them, no good deed goes unpunished. So that's something that
Yeah.
people need to recognize about collaborating with Islamists. It doesn't go well, you know. I mean, even the
Never.
US at some point have had this collaboration with terror organizations that are Islamic in nature, and they feel and this is the same thing with Al Qaeda. There was a time when they were fighting the Russians in the Middle East, in the global South. They linked up with Al Qaeda and all these terror organizations to help push out Russian influence. And when Russia left, those group that you finance, you helped, you train some of anything. They're not like that. They're like, now we are fighting you, and that's what you get. Another question I want to ask, another very important question I want to ask is uh Pakistan, particularly Pakistan, and every month, every week, you hear news from Pakistan of how a minority is being attacked, maybe accused of blasphemy or whatever, or like I'm talking rape, murder, forced conversions, and I don't know how does the government in Pakistan handle this thing, and how is the state of Hindus and other religious minorities in Pakistan? How do they fare? And just like as somebody who is familiar with what is going on there, explain to people how Pakistani Muslims, radicals, use laws like blasphemy laws and other form of loopholes within the system to inflict harm and oppress the minorities.
Well, in Pakistan, ever since India's and Pakistan's independence from the Britishers, it's been a divided society. But
Mm,
there's a lot of propaganda that is being done about minorities in India. But the world press, again, the intellectuals, the human rights groups like
mm,
Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch will not talk about or campaign globally about the persecution of
mm,
minorities that's happening in Pakistan. And this has been happening continuously. In Bangladesh, the Hindu population has come down to 7.5%. In
mm,
Pakistan, I think it has come down further. I mean, there's hardly any Hindu who wants to stay in Pakistan today because there are poor Hindus, unfortunately, who are not very wealthy, who are in Sindh, in different villages, thousands of them,
mm,
who do not have avenues, who are also desperate to leave, who have their girls in particular, who are kidnapped, who are converted to Islam forcibly by Mia Mittu and other Islamist radical preachers,
mm,
and then
mm,
taken away. The government doesn't do anything. Again, there are blasphemy. There are several incidents from Karachi, from Lahore, from other places where Christian houses are destroyed completely. They are falsely
mm,
accused of blasphemy because they want to
mm,
take over their properties, they want to take over their resources, and they falsify cases against them. There are teachers from Hindu and Christian
mm,
community who have been falsely accused by students that there has been blasphemy, and then teachers have been arrested for years together. So this is
mm,
unfortunately in an Islamic society, in a government where Islam is predominant and Muslims are the first priority, minorities become a victim, and that's what
mm,
is happening in Pakistan. But in Pakistan, uh, it's much more complex because it's not just minorities; it's ethnic minorities also. Like I explained, in the last two
mm,
days, there's a huge attack that the Baloch rebels are doing against the Pakistan Army and the Frontier Corps in Balochistan. They
mm,
have killed perhaps a lot of Pakistan Army personnel. But the Pakistan Army does not come out with the real numbers of how many of their men are being killed, of how many of their camps have been taken over or destroyed, of how many
mm,
civilians are being killed. Can you imagine? This morning, there's been a terror attack in Balochistan in which 23 people from Punjab province of Pakistan have been killed, and
mm,
Pakistan media has been banned from covering it. If it would have happened in India, there would have been live coverage for days together. But in
mhm,
Pakistan, there are small reports that are mentioning it, but there is no live coverage, there are no details. And in
mm,
Balochistan, the international press is completely banned. You cannot go to Balochistan. When I made a series on Balochistan, I had to hire a local team in Balochistan who worked silently and requested me not to put out their name, and I
mm,
had to send them money through some accounts in UAE and Canada because directly I
mm,
can't send money from India. So there are Baloch who are troubled, who are in pain, but they do
mhm,
not have a voice. There are Baloch women, there are men, activists who have been kidnapped by the Pakistan Army. There is enforced disappearance that happens for years together, for more than a decade. And it is estimated that more than 60,000 Baloch men have been kidnapped. Now
mm,
imagine if they are doing this with Muslims, what will they do with Hindus and Christians and Sikh? This is why I said this. I mean, this is the reality. So Baloch do
mm,
not want to stay with Pakistan. The Sindhi, if you ask them, do not want to stay with Pakistan. The Kashmiris who are in Pakistan occupied Kashmir do not want to stay with Pakistan. So this is the reality. There's systematic persecution of Hindus and minorities in Pakistan. The government is not interested to rescue them. The Pakistan
mm,
army hates minorities. The security
mm,
forces hate minorities. As per the constitution, there are no religious rights or any special care that is taken of the minorities, and this will
mm,
continue. What I predict really is that
mhm,
Pakistan will destroy itself. We won't need an India or a US or any other Afghanistan or Taliban for it, because Pakistan, through its policies, through its hatred, through its myopic vision, has
mm,
destroyed itself completely. I
mm,
wouldn't be surprised that in the next 1.5 decades, Pakistan would be completely destroyed if they do not
mm,
mend their ways or if they do not do some kind of course correction. As of now, it
mhm,
doesn't seem so. As of now, it is increasingly difficult for Pakistan to survive because there are economic challenges, there are
mhm.
political challenges, and there are security challenges. The TTP will not want them to live in peace. The Pakistan
Mm,
army won't want the politicians and the civilians to live in peace. So this is like a jungle. It's like a vicious circle where Pakistan army is the main hunter and doesn't
mm.
want anybody else to survive or be in a competing space.
It's really the way you describe it is really interesting. It's like this is a country that is on its way to self-destruct if they don't like course correct. If they don't finally realize that running your country based on hatred and attacking minorities and building your entire foreign policy and just hating one country, it's not going to in the long run lead to prosperity in yours. And at one point, you have to start telling it. I hopefully they'll start telling themselves, dealing with reality and making significant change. One question I want to ask, which is something that you've mentioned it, and it's also something that I find concerning. As somebody who once worked with CNN, right? You worked with CNN, uh, and other Western news organizations. What do you think is the reason why you find the West focused or Western media focused, like laser focused on anything that India does that is perceived in the slightest or can be misinterpreted in the slightest to mean an attack on Muslim minorities? But they have Bangladesh, they have Pakistan, they have Afghanistan, and they're just like silent about what is happening in those other countries. But if just the temple that was opened few months ago was like covered by the BBC as if this is just the opening of that temple is going to lead to the death of 1 million Muslims. The way they covered it was so negative. If you follow the coverage, you see just how negative they were talking about the opening of the temple and how this is going to further, escalate the religious conflict and the religious tension in India. Meanwhile, they have other countries in South Asia like Pakistan, and none of the atrocities that Pakistan does or will do will get as much coverage as does the slightest thing that the Indian government does. Why do you think the media has such attitude towards liberal secular societies that found themselves surrounded by extremists and Islamic countries?
Frank, there are
Oh, Raj is what's happening? I don't know why. He just left us for a moment, and let me send him a private chat to know what happened. Guys, I think maybe he's having a little difficulty. Let me send him a private message. Guys, I'll bring him on as soon as he's I think he's having a little technical difficulty. His screen is black. I don't know why that is. He will reconnect. I believe he will reconnect very soon. So, guys, we are here, and I'm starring your questions. I said that people who have questions in the live chat should write their questions and add a queue with a queue. Start the live chat with a queue, and then write your questions. And only Saj has been able to do that. And I have started his comment, and I'm going to return to it towards the end. We'll talk about it towards the end. But other people have not. So if you have questions like that, please, this is your opportunity now that he's going to reconnect, I believe, very soon. He's going to reconnect. So guys, just for a moment, I hope I remember the question I asked. He's going to reconnect. You guys can see me clearly, right? I'm still visible. Okay? Am I? I believe I am. So he's going to come back. Just give it a moment. He's going to come back. I guess he's having a little uh a little problem. Let me send him a message on Instagram. So yeah, he's going to get back with us very, I believe, shortly. Uh so yeah. Uh yeah, with you. Awkward moment with Frank Steven. Welcome to awkward moment with yours truly. Welcome. This is not the kind of question I'm asking. Question: Why is there a weird sound when you talk? When I talk, is there a weird sound when I talk, or is it just uh? Okay, we have him with us.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Sorry, my this thing disconnected. So,
Oh, we have. You
so
remember the question
basically,
I asked, right?
yes, yes, I remember the
Right,
question.
right, right.
There are three major reasons. One is, of course, the kind of bias that they have, and this is in respect to the leftist media. They want to
Mm,
predominantly have their ideology in place, leftist or Islamist in their tendency, depending on which media, where the media really is. And this has been seen continuously. I'll give you an example. In Jammu and Kashmir, where I belong, for years
mm,
together, the kind of reportage that the international press did was from the perspective either of Pakistan or of the local Islamist radical separatists. Never from the perspective of the Hindu minority, never from the perspective of Government of India, and never from the
mm,
perspective of the Indian security forces. If
mm,
there was a shutdown or there was some stone pelting done by the local separatists, it was shown as intifada. It was shown
mm,
as some kind of a democratic revolution. But when the Hindu minorities were persecuted, killed, and there was discrimination, there was no
mm-hmm,
international media uproar, campaign, or even simple reportage. And this is the reality of the day. Second, the most important is, of course, the deep state and what the deep state has its interest. And this comes in respect to a lot of countries, just like we know that in Qatar, there is Al Jazeera. So it will only do what the Qataris really want them to do. So
mm-hmm,
in Kashmir, again, they try to instigate and report only on the Islamist terrorism, on separatism, on the rights of the Muslims, but nothing about the minorities. Nothing about
mm-hmm,
how India has restored democracy, has restored equality in Jammu and Kashmir. And finally, of course, we see lack of knowledge, lack of ground experience, lack of access to what the reality is. The biggest of the example that I was talking about earlier was about the CAA, the
mm-hmm,
Citizenship Amendment Act, that gave priority for Hindus and other minorities, including Christians, Parsis, and Sikh, in Afghanistan,
mm-hmm,
Pakistan, and Bangladesh for citizenship into India. But I was in Iowa in US in 2020, and Al Jazeera
mm-hmm,
contacted me for an interview. They sent a team. I did the interview, but instead of putting across what I did, and I said that minorities have been suffering in these Islamist countries, none of this
mm-hmm,
was used. I was in fact targeted by Al Jazeera as one lone element, one isolated element speaking about and defending the CAA. The same happened in 2019 when Article 370 and 35A was abrogated. And I spoke to Al Jazeera and spoke about how this restores democracy, equality, freedom, economic opportunities for people in Jammu and Kashmir, and how this is a defeat of Pakistan and Islamist terrorism, Islamist
mm-hmm,
radicalization. Again, Al Jazeera did not do it. And guess what? They continue to preach about so called democracy without taking minorities, Hindus, or the Aboriginal people stake or perspective. So, this is the reality of the day. I have dealt with this such kind of biased and atrocious media.
mm-hmm,
The deep
mm-hmm,
state plays a predominant role, ideology plays a predominant role. Anybody who is telling you that they are unbiased and they are reporting as per a principle of neutrality are lying to you. They have an agenda in mind and they always go through that agenda.
That's true. I believe what you said heavily is factual with regards to how the media covers what is going on around the world. There's that ideological bias, and they see everything from that ideological bias. So many of them have people have vested interest. I want to spread a certain narrative. Any story that they want to cover that does not fit into that narrative will not be covered. And if they want to cover it, they have to bend the truth, ignore certain elements, avoid the stories of certain group of people. And I think when it comes to India, much as with the criticism of any person who wants actual freedom in the West, you know, if you don't toe the line that certain people with certain ideology want from you, you'll be labeled something. I remember when the Prime Minister of Italy was before she when she got elected, you know, every news organization from CNN to BBC to the ABC, we're calling her far right, far right. That her party is Mussolini's party. Why? Because she's like anti my illegal migration. She's like anti, you know, influx of refugees from North Africa. And now that the only thing they want to mention is just how she's a far right. She's her party is the party of Mussolini and stuff like that. Meanwhile, in France, you have like an openly communist party getting majority of the votes, and there is no
Yes.
talking really about this person is a communist. This nothing. It's just, oh, Marie Le Pen has been defeated. Marie Le Pen has been. I'm like, yeah, I hear you. I hear your part about her being defeated, but defeated by
Yeah.
whom exactly? Will you talk
You will
about the
never
fallacy?
you will never hear them talk about far left. You will never talk say Islamist radicals or Islamist
Mm,
tendency. Never. In fact, when I
mm,
use the word Islamist, many people take objection that how can you use Islamist? I mean, this is the reality of the day. For decades together, you're witnessing Islamist radicalization and terrorism. If you don't wake up today, when will you wake up? I mean, there are
true.
examples of such terror attacks, such brutal radicalization, innocent youth in many cases, educated youth being radicalized. In India, there were
Mm,
cases about 8 years ago of about 21 or 23 educated youth
mm,
going from Kerala and south of India towards joining ISIS in Syria and
mm,
Afghanistan. And unfortunately, all of them died in their entire process. I was in touch with
mm,
one of them through Telegram, and I requested him at that time that you are so educated, you should come back and leave all this. But he said, no, I had to go and I have to go on this mission. So, such is the level of radicalization. Imagine the kind
mm.
of consequences if governments in the West look the other way and continue to pander to such elements.
It's going to be really, really disastrous. It's going, and the funny thing for the West is those same things that you've covered, you've given covering, and now at your doorstep, they are now in your country, and you are not handling it well. That's the funny part. They're not handling it well. You know, for how long would the Western media be complicit? Only God knows. For how long they'll continue to, you know, provide cover, become like apologists for radical Muslims, become
Yes.
apologists for ideologies that are destructive. You know, being a communist is only a problem when it is a South American country, right? It's not a problem when it's not a problem when it is when it is happening in Europe. It's only a problem when Maduro is a communist. You know, that is when it is a problem. But when it is just right at when there's somebody who is wearing Che Guevara's shirt around your campus and is, you know, chanting murderous, dangerous
You know,
leftist phrases, it's not even a
lastly,
problem.
lastly, lastly, I'll
You
tell
know.
you from what you said. What I've also observed over the years is that for the West,
Mm,
India and countries in the global South are lesser in many ways. They
mm,
still see India as a land of snake charmers. They cannot digest the fact that Indians could be smarter than Americans, that Indians could be
mm,
smarter than the British. In many ways, I'm not saying everybody, but many of
mm,
them have this notion in their mind that how can Indians achieve this? How can Nigerians achieve so much? And how can they be outsmarting us? How can they
mm,
sit on the same table as G20 or other multilateral forums with us? So this is a kind
mm,
of a notion. That's why Americans or the British have their own notion of democracy, have their own notion of secularism, and they want to force each and every country by their own means. They don't want to
mm.
talk to these countries at an equal pedestal. And that is very important to call out this kind of a mindset in diplomacy. Because in today's
Mm,
world, every country is equal. You cannot dictate terms. If there are
mm,
aspirations, if there are concerns within the global south, they would be questioned. And that's why India has taken the lead in this global south and emerged as a great voice. And this happened, unfortunately, during pandemic when India came to the rescue of a lot of countries and gave
Mhm.
vaccine to them. But then in the G20 that India hosted last year, we had
Mm,
African Union for the first time being included as a permanent member of the G20, which was
mm,
huge. I mean, never before have we seen such a step. It's not huge only in the terms of African Union coming and being assimilated as an equal member of G20. It's also
mm.
huge because the Western powers agreed. And that's a huge challenge that
It
India
is.
did. India negotiated
It
that
is.
on the behalf of African Union. So it's a huge achievement. And I think in the problems in a deeply divided world where there are two wars underway, India has taken the lead and spoken about peace. The global south also overall speaks about peace, and this is also something that is irritating the western world, that
Mm,
we have seen the world from our own prison all these years, where there is one axis against the other axis, and India and other countries are supposed to join one axis, that is our axis, against the other. But India refuses to do so. India will show them the mirror and tell them that you are looking at your own strategic autonomy, and so will we. You
true.
have chosen America first. You have chosen
Mhm.
Britain first. Why not India first? Why not Nigeria first? Why not Maldives first? So this is how changes happen in diplomacy, in history, when you
Yeah.
actually take a stand and stand by it. And that's how India has
That's
done it. And this debate will continue, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, that's one thing that I really admire about India and their foreign policy and how they are able to strike, as in really stay in the middle and not take sides or be forced to take a side. You know, when the Ukraine war broke out, everybody has to be against Russia or in support of Russia, or you take a stand. And any country that tries to say, okay, this is not my issue, I don't want to, no, 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 you have to take a stand. You have to tell us who you support, and stuff like that. And it's good to see countries who are like, no, that is not our issue. As much as we empathize with people who are going through certain sufferings, but we allow our own personal interests dictate our foreign policy. And
Yes.
many things people don't understand about like African countries when it comes to their relationship with the West is that when it comes to Western foreign, especially US foreign policy with Africa, they just tell you what to do. That is how it goes. They don't your interest. You have an interest? No, you shouldn't. How dare you have an interest? They just tell your government what to do. They tell you what to do. You do it. You don't do it. They have friction with you. You may leave office very soon. That is just how it works. And such mode of relating with other countries is something that is not good. It continuing like that will keep certain countries down. And it's not even good for people in the US. Such foreign policy is not good for you because you end up having allies that are not really your allies, because they're just forced to go along. And they are weak. Their voice means nothing because you have kept them down. The only way you've been able to succeed in making them your allies is by constantly keeping them down. So you have weak allies. You may be like, oh, we have plenty allies, but they are all weak. And of what significance is that? You know. Let's look at some of the questions that we've been. I want us to look at this one. This is from Sachine or Sachin. He's a Hindu that stays in Texas, and he has this question. He says some Bangladeshis are angry at Indians for sheltering Sheikh Hasina and demand that she be returned so she can be tried at court. Should we return Sheikh Hasina to improve relations, or should we not? How do you respond to this question?
Strategically, I agree that the more Sheikh Hasina stays in India would not be in India's interest. So,
True.
strategically, I think Sheikh Hasina should move out as soon as possible. But you look at the Catch 22 situation right now. She's
Mm,
stranded at an Indian Air Force base for more than 3 weeks now. No Western country that usually jumps in giving asylum to each and every person wants to take Sheikh Hasina, because they know
mm,
that if they give political asylum to Sheikh Hasina, their ties, bilateral ties with Bangladesh will ruin. So India doesn't have any other choice. India has given her temporary shelter at an Air Force base. And now it is upon her and it is upon other countries where she wants to move to decide. As of now,
mm,
there is no request officially that has come from Bangladesh to return Sheikh Hasina or hand her over. So I think the government of India will take their own call whenever that happens.
Oh, that's a good answer. Here's another question. I say, why has not India publicly? I don't think I understand this question. I
I
don't know
think
if you understand.
I think I think the question should be publicly condemned the persecution of
Okay,
Hindus in the West.
in the West.
I think India
Okay.
has whenever there's an persecution that happens, particularly in Bangladesh and Pakistan. India has raised its
Mm-hmm.
voice. But
Mm-hmm.
in the diplomacy, what happens is that you mostly care about your citizens. So if there's an Indian national, Indian citizens attacked, threatened, killed, etc., unfortunately, then India does raise its voice. But India has done so very frequently, mostly in the neighborhood when it concerns Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. But even in the
Mm,
West, when there have been attacks on temples, when there's been hate graffiti on temples, when there is
mm,
intimidation, threats, India has raised its voice. I'm sure they should do much more. That I agree with you.
mhm. No, is that what you said is really true? I mean, even when it comes to covering what was happening in Bangladesh, it was mostly the Indian press and the Indian government raising concerns about what the status of Hindu minorities and other minorities in Bangladesh. I think they did a really good job. If you ask me, my own country will not care about certain Nigerians dying in certain places. They will ask you what took you there.
Yeah.
Another question is this from Jack. She said, "What are Hindus doing to protect themselves and their families? And how can they protect their families?" So I guess
I
she's
think this
asking
is
with regards to
Yeah, I think this
Hindu.
is mostly in the context of Bangladesh.
Yeah.
I think they don't have any other way. I mean, they've been living there for years and decades together. I'm sure
Mm,
they have some trusted neighbors or places where they can temporarily live, and that's what they're doing. Either they are fleeing away from Bangladesh or they're continuing to stay. There are some good Samartians who would be taking care of them. For instance, I spoke to a Hindu priest of
mm,
ISKCON in Bangladesh who said that we are living in a separate rented accommodation, not inside the temple, till the time things stabilize. So people have their own ways of securing their lives. And what really happens is that in Dhaka, situation might be okay, but the more you go away into the
mm.
interiors, situation worsens because nobody is in control. Now things are stabilizing a little, but that does not mean permanent calm and peace. So it will take time.
Yeah. Also, I want to use this opportunity to ask people if you have questions. I will be able to take a couple or a few more. So send your. Remember how you ask the question is you begin with a Q, and then I know what you just typed is a question, and then I'll be able to address them. Beginning with a Q, and I will highlight them. And if your questions are good questions, I believe they are. My audience are known for asking good questions. We'll address them. So do that while we look at other questions. But before we go to the questions, there's a question I want to ask. What about Hindus in Muslim majority district in India? How safe are Hindus in Muslim majority districts in India?
Overall in India, there's the rule of law that applies, and it does
Okay.
not matter which religion is in majority or minority. Uh, Everybody, according to Government of India, according to Constitution, according to laid down principles and laws, is treated equally. But yes, in many places, unfortunately, sometimes there's violence, there are communal riots, and there are selective targeting that also happens. In India, it's only Jammu and Kashmir, which is a majority state. But yes, there could
Mm,
be some districts in Uttar Pradesh or other parts of the country where there's a Muslim majority. As I said, in Muslims, of course, constitute, I think, the second or the third largest in the world who are in India. So they
mm,
enjoy equal rights as each and every other citizen. It's not the same in Bangladesh, Afghanistan, in Pakistan, as you know. So
mm,
there are troubles that happen, but there are democratic means and techniques of dealing with that. So people can reach out to courts, to police, to other grievance related mechanisms of the government.
mm.
Again, not the same in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it may not be perfect, but it is better when you compare all the alternatives within that region. I believe
Yes.
is the answer you're giving. I want to ask, which is something I had when I discussed with somebody who is in India, and is there like uh, communities or areas where in India, besides just Kashmir, where a form of Sharia law is being like implemented, and is there blasphemy law in India?
No, there is no blasphemy law. There is treason kind of a law, which is like acting against the
Okay.
state. But there's nothing like blasphemy. In Kashmir, also, there is no Sharia. It is the government of India's constitution and rule that applies. But yes,
Mm,
there are often attempts. There's a lot of radicalization that happens, particularly in the south of the
mm,
country, where elements try to instigate riots, violence, and also attack other communities. That happens. But as I said, there are democratic means and mechanisms and the rule of law, the police, the courts that do their
mm.
job well.
Okay, that's a very good. Trying to highlight all the questions so I don't miss them. All right, this is from Parat Chick, and she said, "Was the coup in okay? She means the coup in Bangladesh a raw intelligence failure. Did they know Hindus would be targeted? She's asking not India, but the coup in Bangladesh. Like, was
No,
it
I don't think.
known?
See, I don't think that it was a major failure. Of course, a lot of people across the world, including I'm sure many in government of India, were taken by
Mm,
surprise with how things happened and how fast things happened in Bangladesh. So I don't see it as a major flaw of RNAW. Even if
mm,
RNAW knew, or perhaps they knew, I'm not sure. I don't think they would have been able to change things. India is not in the business like CIA or others of regime change. India
mm,
is a close partner of Bangladesh, no matter who is in the government. Of course, India was seen more close to Sheikh Hasina and Awami League because of the historical
mm,
connections since the formation
mm,
of Bangladesh. So it is not, a defeat of RNAW of India, but strategically and diplomatically speaking, it is a huge setback for India. India had
mm,
invested in Bangladesh, a lot of infrastructure and trade-related projects were underway, connectivity projects were underway, and now it's a huge setback. We'll have to wait and
mm,
watch when the new government now takes shape. What will their priorities be when it comes to bilateral relations with India?
mm, mm, mm. On not the next question we are going to look at is this is from Sachin. He said, how can Hindus win the media battle and fight back against the Al Jazeera agenda of Muslim innocent victims and the and Hindu evil oppressors in India? This is a very
Well,
good question.
it's a very good question, but the only means that I see is that social media is more powerful than any media in the world. So I
Mm,
think be active on social media, raise your voice. Don't just wait for anybody else to wake up and raise your voice. Be your own voice. Put
mm-hmm,
out your videos, put out your statements, and say it aloud. That's what I have done. From the very
mm-hmm,
beginning, from the advent of social media, I've raised my voice. I've been very active, and that's often leading me to problems as well. But that's okay. I mean, if you choose your battle well, you need to have the conviction, the courage of conviction, passion,
mm,
and determination to take it forward. So, if you want to do something for your community, for your religion, for your people, for your society, you need to raise your voice boldly, courageously,
mm,
and with all the power at your command, and use social media as much as possible. I mean, from YouTube to Twitter to Instagram, you can
mm-hmm,
do reels, you can do videos, you can do interviews, you can do explainers, or you could just express your opinion on Twitter. So a lot can be done, even by
mm-hmm.
individuals.
Yeah, like I always tell people, the best way to, if you want your story to be told well, you want to tell it yourself. If you leave it in the hands of other people, uh, they are going to tell it with the perspective and with the goal that they want to achieve. So the best person to tell your story is you. Don't allow
True.
the propaganda machine to be the only narrative out there. Include yours, and thank God for platforms like Twitter. Thank God for platforms like Although sometimes they can do some crackdowns, especially Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. But to the best that you are allowed to express yourself, use these channels and use this medium to tell the truth about what's going on. And that's how we can, combat the false information that is being put out there. Strongly, I believe that's how it can be combated. Now, we're not getting any more questions. I believe everybody's question is done because I'm not seeing any question again. I believe I've addressed all of them.
Yeah.
Say a question. Is that it? Okay, it's not. By way of, I think it's time to give like a closing remark to kind of. But before the closing remark, what will you tell? Because I think this is problem that people in the West are gradually having to deal with. Okay, like stabbings, terror attacks, newspaper publications, people, even journalists being killed, people, leaders, political leaders being targeted. And somebody just asked the question and said, "What is the solution?" I saw this question before, but the reason why I didn't highlight it is solution to what exactly? I don't know what you mean by, if you can make your question clearer, what is the solution to what? You know, then I believe we'll be able to, because what is the solution is pretty vague if you ask me. And also, thank you, Happy Mark, for the super chat, super sticker. Rather. I really appreciate it. Okay, but back to the question I was trying to ask. So these people are people in the West, especially in Europe and parts of North America, are having to now deal with radical elements in their societies. And the average, although the government is of course hopelessly clueless, but the average individual who is learning about this kind of issue is wondering, what do we do? What do we do? Like, I'm talking average Western citizens. They're asking themselves, what do we do? How do we uh address this? How do we make a change? How do we help ourselves? What kind of advice will you give to people in the West who are now dealing with radical elements, not just the government, but the people themselves? What do you think they can do to protect themselves and defend themselves, and also maybe even help in bringing a government that will care about them?
I think the only way forward is to raise awareness, raise education, raise your
Mm,
voice, and that's most significant. If you be silent and a mute spectator and want somebody else
mm,
to raise your voice or concerns, then the entire thing is defeated completely. I see a lot of intolerance also growing in the coming days, but this will
mm,
only grow if there is a myopic vision that the governments and people in power really have. So it is the responsibility of the people in power to keep such elements under check, to keep radicalization under check, and to first and foremost treat everyone equally and especially protect your minorities, in this case Hindus, in many cases Christians, Sikh, also. So it is mostly upon the governments, particularly in the West, to come
mm,
and rescue these people. You can't just preach
mm,
about democracy and how people should behave. You yourself need to behave in a certain manner and come to the rescue of the people. That is most important. And of course, in
mm,
media, I feel there is a division. There are their own self-interest and priorities in mind. As I said,
mm,
sometimes it's the ideology, sometimes it's the deep state, and sometimes it's just lack of knowledge. This is also something you have to deal with. The biggest weapon in your hands is the social media, to narrate the truth, to let the people know what the reality really is. In many cases, in Hamas Israel conflict, in Russia Ukraine conflict, in India Pakistan conflict, in any part of the world, wherever there are conflicts happening, whenever there are minorities suffering, social media is predominantly playing a very key role. The Western
mm,
press may say that no, everything is hunky dory in Bangladesh, but the reality is coming out in social media of how temples are being attacked, Hindus in particular are being attacked as well. In Pakistan,
mm,
the Baloch are rising, but do you see any global headlines where people are talking about the Baloch rights or enforced disappearances or questioning
mm,
the Pakistan army or their role? So, yes, the media is biased. The media will not tell you the truth completely unless it's their interest in mind. So, you have to raise your voice. I commend Baloch people in Balochistan, Kashmiris in Kashmir, raising their
mm,
voice against the Pakistani ill treatment, persecution, human rights violations that happen often. But the Western countries need to realize that will they choose the
mm,
path of democracy, or will they go the Pakistan way, where they want to destroy their countries, where they want to destroy the democracy that they so firmly believe in, and do they want to convert their lands into separatist movements and gangster violence and criminal, goons taking over their
mm,
streets? Because that's what is happening in UK, in Canada, and US. If things continue
mhm.
the way it is, God bless them. Only God can help them in that case.
He said, God help them. God bless America. All right, this is the question from Sachin, another one. And he said, millions of Hindus are in danger in Bangladesh. Is it realistic and feasible for India to take in all those Bangladeshi Hindus? Should India invade Bangladesh to protect the Hindus?
Okay, Frank,
What
this
is,
will be the last question, and I'll move out after this.
okay,
Uh,
okay.
yes, of course. India can do a lot. India can stand for
Mm,
humanity. India can maintain bilateral ties with Bangladesh. India, of course,
mm,
can become a voice of the Hindus who are being persecuted in Bangladesh, and India has done so. The External Affairs
mm,
Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, spoke at the parliament, spoke to people in Bangladesh as well, and raised
mm,
concern against minority attacks.
mm,
Of course, we'll have to deal with this step by step manner. We have
mm,
informed the government that this cannot be tolerated in any democratic society, and you need to step in immediately. And assurances have come both from the interim government and the Bangladesh army that Hindus would be protected. So, apart
mm,
from the PR of Islamists or students standing outside temples and saying that they are protecting them, they should have
mm,
done so earlier when Hindus were being attacked and temples were being destroyed. The interim
mm,
government chief also went to one of the prominent temples, Hindu temples in Dhaka, the Dakeshwari Devi temple. But this is
mm,
on optics. This is PR. You need to
mhm,
realistically protect Hindus and minorities. Only then there will be a reassurance and not a fear psychosis. So the ball is entirely in the court of Bangladesh in this particular case. The interim government will have to take more measures to secure and safe the safety for the safety of minorities.
mm. Thank you. Thank you for that very good answer. And thank you, Can You Not, for the super sticker. This is the first super sticker from although she has done a couple of super chats, but this is the first super sticker with no comment. Thank you very much, Can You Not. I really appreciate that. And guys, we've come to the end. I really want to appreciate you so much, Aditya, for spending this time with us. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully, we can have you again in the future. And my audience is really happy to have you. I believe so many people have learned a lot. You can see Ayinora is saying thank you, and we are all
Thank you.
saying thank you. Yeah, we are all saying thank you, and till we get another live stream again with you, and till then, anyway, let me use this opportunity to thank the audience. Everyone who is in the audience, I thank you. 384 of you. This is a large number. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope we've delivered. And don't forget to follow me, follow Aditya, follow him on Twitter, follow him on Instagram. You can see the details of his social media handles on the description of this video on YouTube. Follow his socials. You will learn a lot about what is going on around various places in the world by following him, and also by following me too. So give me that follow on Twitter and on Instagram. And yeah, thank you everyone. And until we meet again, peace.
Thank you, Frank. You did a great job today. That's what the comments are saying, and I'm sure you do a great job always. So it was a great pleasure interacting with you, Threadbare, for the last
Yeah.
2 hours. Great conversation, and God bless you. Have a great time. Keep getting more followers across social media and raising your voice.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you. Bye.